Hello, friends in the Netherlands. I'm Debra Kerr, president of Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art. We're a small museum taking on a big adventure to tour our exhibition, Chicago Calling, Art Against the Flow, to 4 venues in Europe. First, All Saint-Pierre in Paris, the Kunsthaus Kaufbeuren outside of Munich, the Collection de l'Art Brut in Lausanne, and now for our final and most exciting stop, we are here at the Outsider Art Museum in Amsterdam. It's been a wonderful partnership with our Dutch friends and colleagues. I'm so pleased to grasp the outstretched hand of my colleague and now friend, Hans Logen. Hans asked me if the Outsider Art Museum could be the final stop on the tour, and I was so pleased that he asked. What has happened subsequently is a great partnership and friendship between the 2 museums and between our teams of staff. This is a wonderful opportunity to showcase 10 fine Chicago artists to the Netherlands and to Western Europe. We're so excited to be opening this exhibit, even though we can't be with you in person. Intuit is here in Chicago because Chicago was one of the first places to really embrace outsider art in the United States as a legitimate genre. And people who became fascinated with this art came together in the early 90s to found Intuit in 1991. In the early 50s, French artist Jean du Bufay came to the United States to really try to get this country to embrace art brut, as he called it. He first came to New York. He didn't get very much traction there, but eventually he came to Chicago, and he gave a speech at the Arts Club of Chicago in 1951 entitled Anti-Cultural Positions. In this speech, he really begged people to embrace art that came from different places. But he was speaking to the choir, as we say, because Chicago was already interested in this unusual form of art. People were already looking for these kinds of artists, and there was already some exhibitions happening. The Arts Club had done an exhibition of the works by Horace Pippin, and other exhibitions were to follow. And then in the 60s, the School of the Art Institute had a couple of professors who encouraged their art students to look beyond the classical, to look in unusual places. And you'll see in our exhibition that we talk about places like Maxwell Street Market, which was, yes, a street market, a marché de puces, a flea market, where you could buy anything that you wanted that was sort of low value. And some of these artists that you're discovering at this exhibition got their start right there, like Mr. Imagination, who began early on as a little kid selling jewelry that he had made at the Maxwell Street Market. So Chicago has a rich history of embracing this art, and we're so pleased to share that history with our colleagues and our friends in the Netherlands. So Dutch friends, please do enjoy this exhibition, enjoy these 10 artists, and now you know why Chicago Calling is called that, because Chicago is the place that really accepted and discovered many, many outsider artists who are some of the most notable outsider artists to this day. People often ask me, why were so many outsider artists from Chicago? There are outsider artists everywhere. But what happened in Chicago is that people were looking for outsider artists. Here we are in Henry Darger's room. Now, the actual room was in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, but we're lucky to have all these objects from Henry's original belongings in his original room that were given to us by his landlord. And the reason we have these, and the reason we even know about Henry Darger, is that his landlord was someone who recognized art when he saw it. As you know, Henry Darger was a recluse. He had probably been abused as a child. He was institutionalized in an asylum for children when he was a child and escaped and returned to Chicago. He lived in this one-room apartment for the last 30 years or so of his life. And upon his death, his landlords found a 15,000-page novel, an autobiography, other writings, and these miraculous drawings that you'll see in the exhibition that are so beautiful. Here we have Henry Darger's working table, and some of the most unusual and priceless items to us are these little paint pots. And the paint pots, he's not only mixed up tempera, and he often used watercolor, but these are tempera. He mixed them up to have the colors that he wanted, and he's also labeled the colors. And the colors are labeled things like army shirt green and storm cloud purple, which I think is really charming. We also think that maybe he was trying to use tempera as a way to get a more vivid color than watercolor would give him. He was a tremendous hoarder, and we have things like boxes of rubber bands that he kept. The little ones that we have, he would tie them or tape them together to try and make them last longer. And we have bundles and bundles of twine that he rolled into balls to keep. Many of the items that you see here are little child's watercolor paint kits. He didn't, most of these here he hasn't used, so we don't have the remains of his watercolors, but we do have these remarkable tempera paint pots that he made. All of these piles of papers that you see are really treated as scrapbooks. He would cut objects, cartoons, coloring book pages, other images out of newspapers and magazines, and most of these are images of children or children at play, images that he might want to reuse in his art. Often they're images of dramatic weather events. He was very interested in the weather, and many of his artworks have giant storm clouds in the background, or tornadoes, twisters in the background to emphasize the drama of the scene. So here we have so many of those source materials, and I'll share a few of those with you. These are some of the notebooks that Henry used as scrapbooks. Here we have an exciting weather event, Hurricane Betsy, that hit New Orleans in 1965. And these are cartoons, two of them from American newspapers. They'll do it every time, and there ought to be a law. All three of these are filled with those same cartoons. This one I love because it's got the little jet planes. You can imagine that this was a child's school notebook. One of my favorite objects in the room is this thermometer. I think that this also happened in Europe, but in the United States, back in the 50s and 60s, local businesses would give a little gift item to the people that use their business. This one is Hanson Laundry and Dry Cleaners, and in the old days, the phone numbers to help you remember the local exchanges would have a word first. So Bittersweet 8 for BI8. This is a thermometer. It still seems to be working just fine. But of course, Henry loved this because of this delightful image of this sweet child, which is exactly the kind of thing that he would want to collect and keep. The fireplace and mantelpiece and the skirting, this is one of the highlights of the Darger room. Volunteers brought this over from the original room and put it back together so beautifully. Many people are drawn to this tableau. It's a perfect assembly of a cabinet of curiosities. And of course, people often come right in and look at this dog with the head of Jesus on it. But it is kind of an entire coming together of his interests in children, in the Catholic religion, in other objects that he would pick up as he was walking the streets of Chicago, inspecting trash cans, and bringing beloved objects home to his room. Here we are in Intuit's Robert A. Ross Study Center. This facility attracts scholars and visitors from around the world who are interested in outsider artists and interested, of course, in Henry Darger. And we keep a number of the Henry Darger archives here. And I look forward to showing you some of these. This was one of the magazines that was in Henry's collection. And you can see that why this would be of interest to him. Very interested in the different hem lengths in the clothing of these girls and women, depending on their age. So the little girl has the higher hem, the middle girl has the somewhat lower hem, and of course mom has the lowest hem of all. was very interested in popular culture and in fashion. Here we have a tracing of little girls' clothing. In some of the works you'll see in the exhibition, you'll see these little girls. Henry traced them over and over again, and they appear in many of his artworks. I call her Little Cooking Girl, but she's not always cooking in the artwork, but you'll see her standing in this position. This one is clearly little Bo Peep from the nursery rhyme. She's running away from the spider, but this little girl, either facing this way or often even facing the other way, will appear over and over again in Darger's artworks. And here's a little umbrella girl, and she appears in many of his artworks as well, facing this way and facing the other way. There's a new book coming out this spring by Darger scholar Lisa Runquist, where she explores cuteness and little girls in Henry Darger's art. And she talks about the fact that these girls appear to be able to morph their gender at will. And there's a couple of things that we know would have influenced that. One is he was deeply Catholic, and there is a 4th century saint, Saint Vivia Perpetua, who dreamed the night before she was martyred that she went into the Colosseum, her clothes fell away, and she had become a man, a gladiator ready to fight. And there are other stories of Catholic saints in which there's a gender transformation. We also know that he was interested in Saint Taurez of Lisieux. Saint Taurez was also known as the Little Flower. And here we have a letter that was written to him by the Society of the Little Flower here in Chicago. So we know he was interested. Only 2 of the Vivian girls have flower names, and that's Daisy and Violet. And Saint Taurez famously said that we know the showy flowers, but we should also pay attention to the little flowers, Daisy and Violet. Here we have some song lyrics, and these look very much like song lyrics from World War I songs. Farewell to these songs, Ring Around a Rosie, Tramp, Tramp, the boys are marching, and It's a Long Way to Tipperary. So very much influenced by World War I. One of the artists in the Chicago Calling exhibition that has the most artworks is Wesley Willis. Wesley Willis was known to walk around the streets of Chicago with a portfolio almost, a big bundle of this paper with him, this poster board, and he would draw from the bridges over the highways, like this one. And here we are, kind of on the south side of Chicago on one of the main highways. And on the south side is a university, the Illinois Institute of Technology. And it's famous for its architecture school because Mies van der Rohe, who left Germany before World War II, brought the Bauhaus to that school. And some of the staff at the architecture school kind of adopted Wesley because they thought his drawings were so architectural. So they gave him kind of an honorary office in Crown Hall, which is known to be this famous architecture school. The other thing that's really interesting about Wesley is that he is almost as well or better known here in Chicago for being an outsider musician. He performed all over the city. He performed here at Intuit many times before his death. And maybe one lasting interesting thing about this artwork is that you just see a little peek of the Sears Tower there in the corner. And I love these cars. They're so boxy and angular, really terrific. Lee Goede was a Chicago icon. People all over the city would see her on the steps of the Art Institute, walking up and down famed Michigan Avenue, trying to sell her artwork. But she would only sell to you if she liked you. There's a famous story I heard. A woman who is one of our members said that she passed Lee Goede on her way to work every day. She and her husband would walk to work together. There's a famous story one of our members tells. She and her husband would walk to work every morning and they would see Lee Godey selling her art. So one day she said to her husband, "Today is the day I'm going to buy a piece of artwork." So as she and her husband approached Lee, she said, "I'd love to buy something." And Lee said, "No, you can't have anything." And the woman said, "Why not?" And she said, "Well, you're too short." So our member turned to her husband, who is a much taller person, and said, "Would you sell to him?" And Lee looked at him and said, "Yes, I can sell to him." So she got her artwork from Lee Godey. But Lee clearly wanted to sell to you if she liked you. This piece is unusual and usual in a couple ways. It's usual because she's painted this on what looks like a piece of window shade fabric, the old-fashioned window shades that roll up and down. So it has kind of the appearance of canvas, but it's not canvas. It's unusual because she has a found brooch that she's pinned to the canvas here. So this portrait is really phenomenal, some very typical characteristics, but this incredible pin, this incredible brooch right there in the middle of the painting. She evidently would spend some time sleeping rough, but sometimes sleeping in transient hotels. She famously asked gallerist Carl Hammer to be her banker, so he kept what small savings she had safe for her. She is, of course, known for going into the old bus stations and going into the photo booths, taking stylized photos of herself, very much avant-garde photos of her as different persona, way before we thought of doing that or other artists thought of doing that. And she would attach those sometimes to her paintings as kind of a signature. This is possibly my favorite item in Intuit's collection. This is called a dancing dress. It was made by Gregory Warmack, better known as Mr. Imagination or Mr. I. Mr. I led a really interesting life. He made jewelry, which he sold in the Maxwell Street Market as a child. And at one point in his life, he was, I think, outside a bar, and a vagrant stabbed him. And he ended up in the hospital in a coma for several months. And when he came out of the coma, he said that he had visited his previous life, that he had been an ancient Egyptian king. And from that moment forward, he really took to that Egyptian eye. He was a very flamboyant character. I feel sad that I never got a chance to meet him. Many in the outsider art community did. He started to make these dresses. He made his first one. His mother was a seamstress, so he thought he would make this dress. And his idea was that he was eventually going to put a figure inside it. But once the dress was made, people said, "Wow, that's just incredible," like it is. And the reason it's a dancing dress, I'm going to blow lightly on it, is that it dances. It dances a little bit. So you can see the movement and how elegant and beautiful. This is one of the smaller ones. He made some larger ones, but I think these are absolutely phenomenal. If you get up close, you can see that they're made with a mesh netting, like a screen. So really incredible. We have a lot of Mr. Imagination's work in our collection, and I know that there's some amazing work in the Chicago Calling exhibition. Take a close look, enjoy. Every single one of those objects was made with found materials. Mr. Imagination is a huge fan of found materials, from bowling balls to toothbrushes to paintbrushes, obviously bottle caps that he's turned into gems. It's imagination run amok.